I could buy this school if I wanted to. What grade's going to change that? Matt Cole, 17-year-old billionaire's son, just said that to his school counselor. Third semester of straight fee, doesn't care. Why would he? He's inheriting an empire. But here's what Matt doesn't know. The woman dusting the bookshelves outside that office has a master's degree in literature. Grace Johnson used to teach at an elite academy until she was fired for reporting wealthy students who bought their college essays. She's been listening to Matt fail for months, watching him coast on his father's name. And this morning she whispered 7 words that will haunt him. If your money disappeared tomorrow, would you still be worth anything? Matt laughed it off, but tonight his father just froze his accounts, took his car, cut off his credit cards. And suddenly that question isn't theoretical anymore. Wisdom doesn't always come from expensive schools or powerful fathers. Sometimes it comes from the quietest corners, the overlooked spaces, the people we've trained ourselves not to see. Matt Cole had access to the best education money could buy. Private tutors, elite institutions, resources most people could only dream of. But none of it worked, because education without humility is just expensive noise. It took a maid named Grace Johnson, a woman paid to clean his floors, to teach him the one lesson his privilege had hidden from him: that learning begins the moment pride ends. This is their story, a story about a boy who had to lose everything to find out who he could become, and a woman who'd lost everything but never stopped teaching. His name was Matthew Cole, the only son of Richard Cole, a self-made billionaire whose face appeared on business magazines with the regularity of quarterly earnings reports. Matt grew up surrounded by private jets, personal chefs, and birthday parties, where celebrities showed up as casually as neighbors. But for all he had, one thing was missing: worth. At 17, Matt attended Westbridge Academy, one of the most prestigious private schools in New York. Not because he earned his way in, but because the name Cole opened doors like a skeleton key. No entrance exams, no merit interviews. Just a wire transfer there that made administrators smile and look the other way. Inside those marble halls lined with portraits of senators and tech moguls, Matt was known for 3 things: his arrogance, his designer wardrobe, and his spectacular academic failure. His report cards were monuments to mediocrity. Teachers passed him out of fear of losing the Cole family's generous annual donations, not because he'd learned anything. He didn't care. Why would he? One day he'd inherit an empire worth billions. What could a GPA possibly do that his last name couldn't? He mocked teachers openly, ignored classmates like they were beneath him, smirked through lectures as if education itself was a waste of his valuable time. When the school counselor finally called him in after his 3rd consecutive semester of straight Fs, Matt leaned back in the leather chair and smiled. I could buy this school if I wanted to. What grade's gonna change that? The quote spread through Westbridge like wildfire, whispered in hallways, repeated at lunch tables. But no one dared confront him. Not the teachers, not the administration, not even the other wealthy students who knew exactly how much power the Cole name carried. Everyone tiptoed around Matt. No one wanted to risk being on the wrong side of a family that could fund or bankrupt an institution with a single phone call. At home, things weren't much better. His father, Richard Cole, was a man carved from iron, cold, calculating, and utterly unforgiving. A self-made billionaire who'd clawed his way up from poverty and had zero tolerance for entitlement, even from his own blood. You're an embarrassment, Richard said one evening after yet another call from Westbridge's principal. His voice was quiet, which somehow made it worse. If you worked for me, you'd be fired on the spot. Matt crossed his arms, rolling his eyes. Good thing I'm not your employee then. I'm your son. The world doesn't care whose son you are. Richard set down his glass with precise control. Either you become someone worth knowing, or you'll spend your life as just another rich kid with a famous last name and no spine. And I won't carry dead weight, not even you. The silence that followed hit like a physical blow. Richard wasn't bluffing. He never bluffed. The next morning, Matt showed up at Westbridge like nothing had happened. He pulled into the student lot in his sleek Mercedes, an 18th birthday gift, and walked through the entrance like he owned the building. Designer sunglasses, Italian leather jacket, every step calculated to project untouchable confidence. Some students stared in envy, others looked away in disgust. But one pair of eyes didn't look away. Hers, an older black woman, probably in her 50s, was dusting the bookshelves near the administrative wing. Her posture was upright, her movements efficient, her eyes quiet but impossibly alert. Her uniform was simple and worn, but something about her presence refused to fade into the background. Matt didn't notice her. To him, she was invisible, just the maid. Background noise in the soundtrack of his life. But school began to weigh on him. More tests, more failing grades, more whispers that he was coasting on his father's name. And then came the punishment. Richard made good on his threat. He froze Matt's accounts, took the Mercedes keys, cut off his credit cards, told him coldly, "You want money? Earn your worth first." One bitter morning, humiliated and furious, Matt trudged through the mansion's service hallway, a route he'd never taken before, since he usually had drivers. He passed the maid polishing the banister. She was humming softly, then whispered something under her breath. "If your money disappeared tomorrow, would you still be worth anything?" Matt stopped cold. "What did you just say?" Grace Johnson looked up, calm, unafraid, eyes holding centuries of wisdom he couldn't begin to understand. "Nothing you're ready to hear yet, young man." He laughed, but something in her words cut through the armor. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough." She turned back to her work like the conversation was already over, like he wasn't worth more of her time. Matt stood there for another moment, confusion mixing with something unfamiliar. Shame. Then she walked away like nothing had happened, her footsteps echoing down the empty corridor. But Matt kept thinking about her. That night, lying awake in his too-large bedroom, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the question. If your money disappeared tomorrow, would you still be worth anything? Before we continue, if this story already speaks to your heart, don't just scroll, subscribe, and join our growing family of believers in hope and love. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to know the next week. Matt walked through Westbridge's marble halls with his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. Everything felt different, colder, smaller, heavier. Gone was the smug energy he used to carry like a shield. Now he moved quickly, quietly, trying not to feel the weight of eyes following him. The golden boy had fallen, and for the first time in his life, Matt Cole had no idea how to get back up. But somewhere in the mansion's quiet morning hours, Grace Johnson dusted the same bookshelves, hummed the same songs, and waited. She'd planted the seed, now she'd see if it could grow. The literature exam came back on a Friday afternoon. Matt sat in the back row of Mr. Carter's classroom, staring at the paper like it was written in a foreign language, which in a way it was. The essay prompt had asked students to analyze the theme of self-deception in The Great Gatsby. Matt had written 3 paragraphs about expensive parties and concluded that Gatsby was basically just rich and sad. The grade glared up at him in red ink. F. Below it, Mr. Carter had written, "This demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of both the text and the assignment. See me after class." Matt didn't see him after class. He shoved the paper into his backpack and left through the side entrance. Taking the long way home on foot, since his car was still locked in the garage, keys held hostage by his father's ultimatum. By the time he reached the mansion, his jaw ached from clenching it. He came through the service entrance, the route he'd been taking lately to avoid his father, and nearly collided with Grace in the narrow corridor. She was carrying fresh linens, moving with that efficient grace that seemed to waste no motion. "Careful now," she said, steadying herself. Matt muttered an apology and tried to push past, but the exam paper slipped from his open backpack and fluttered to the floor between them. Grace bent down and picked it up before he could stop her. Her eyes scanned the page, the red F, the scathing comment, Matt's pathetic attempt at literary analysis. "Rough day?" she asked gently, offering the paper back. "You wouldn't understand." He snatched it from her hand, harsher than he meant to. Grace didn't flinch. "Try me." "It's nothing, just another test I don't care about." "You care." Her voice was soft but certain. "Otherwise, you wouldn't look like you're about to put your fist through that wall." Matt stopped, caught off guard by how easily she'd seen through him. What does it matter? His voice came out raw. The teachers hate me. The system's rigged. I could write a perfect essay, and they'd still fail me because of who I am. That's a convenient story to tell yourself. It's the truth, is it? Grace set down the linens on a nearby shelf. Or is it easier to blame everyone else than to admit you don't know how to do the work? The words hit like a slap. What would you know about it? You clean houses for a living? The moment the words left his mouth, he regretted them. But Grace's expression didn't change. No anger, no hurt, just a quiet sadness that somehow felt worse. I once taught students who thought like you, she said simply. Matt blinked. What? Students who believed the world owed them something, who thought their name or their money or their connections meant they didn't have to try. She picked up her linens again. I taught high school English for 15 years, Matthew. Before this. He stared at her, speechless. You? The word came out as half laugh, half disbelief. You're a maid. Not always. Grace reached into her apron pocket and pulled out something, a small battered notebook with a worn leather cover. Things change, careers end. Life humbles us in ways we don't expect. She held the notebook out to him, but that doesn't mean we stop learning or teaching. Matt looked at the notebook like it might bite him. What is this? A place to start. She pressed it into his hands. Write what you don't know, Matthew. Not what you think teachers want to hear. Not what will get you a grade. Write what you're afraid to admit. I don't need. Yes, you do. Her eyes held his, unflinching. You're drowning, and you're too proud to ask for help. So I'm offering it. No judgment, no lecture, just a notebook and a choice. She walked away before he could respond, her footsteps fading down the corridor. Matt stood there holding the notebook, his failed exam in his other hand, feeling like the ground beneath him had shifted in some fundamental way. That night, he couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., Matt sat at the kitchen table, the mansion dark and silent around him. The notebook lay open in front of him, blank pages glowing under the single pendant light. Grace had marked one page with a folded corner. On it, she'd written in elegant cursive, "The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool." William Shakespeare. Below it, a question in her handwriting. What are you afraid to admit you don't know? Matt stared at the page for 10 minutes, then picked up a pen. His first attempt was defensive. I know plenty. The system's broken, not me. He crossed it out, started again. I don't know how to study. I don't know how to read like they want me to. I don't know why everyone else seems to understand things I can't. His hand cramped. He kept writing. I don't know who I am without my last name. I don't know if anyone would care about me if I wasn't rich. I don't know how to be worth something. The words poured out, messy and raw. Confessions he'd never said aloud. Fears he'd buried under arrogance and expensive clothes. When he finally stopped, 3 pages were filled with his cramped handwriting. He felt exhausted, exposed, but also, strangely, lighter. Upstairs in the staff quarters on the 3rd floor, 2 housekeepers whispered over late-night tea. Did you see her talking to young Master Cole again? Maria, the younger one, kept her voice low. In the hallway, gave him something. She's overstepping, unaping, Elena replied, shaking her head. We're hired to clean, not to whatever she thinks she's doing. Should someone tell Mr. Cole? Not our place. But if she keeps pushing boundaries, Elena sipped her tea thoughtfully. The rich don't like the help getting too familiar. She should remember that. Their conversation drifted to other things, but the seed was planted. By morning, Richard Cole's assistant would mention, casually, that the maid seemed to be spending an unusual amount of time near Matthew. Just an observation, nothing urgent, but Richard Cole didn't ignore observations. Dawn broke cold and gray over New York. Matt stood outside the service entrance at 5:47 a.m., the notebook clutched in his hand. He'd barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those pages he'd filled, his handwriting admitting things he'd never said to anyone. The door opened. Grace appeared, surprised to find him there. Matthew, what are you? You said you taught for 15 years. The words came out in a rush. You said you taught students like me. I did. Why did you stop? Grace's expression shifted, something old and painful crossing her face. That's a story for another time. Was it because of students like me? Did they ruin it for you? No. Her voice was firm. You didn't ruin anything. Life is more complicated than that. Matt held up the notebook. I wrote in it last night, all night. I wrote things I've never... He stopped, throat tight. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to fix this. But you seem to know, and I... He forced himself to meet her eyes. If you're serious about helping me, then teach me. Grace studied him for a long moment. The proud boy who'd mocked her was gone. In his place stood someone younger, more honest, more afraid. She smiled, small, knowing, full of possibility. Be here tomorrow. 5:30. Bring the notebook. She stepped back inside. And Matthew, leave your pride at the door. It won't fit where we're going. The door closed. Matt stood in the gray dawn holding a battered notebook that somehow felt heavier than his entire failed academic career. But for the first time in months, maybe years, he felt something other than empty arrogance. He felt hope. The first morning, Matt arrived at 5:28 a.m., 2 minutes early and terrified she wouldn't show. The service entrance was locked. He stood in the pre-dawn darkness, breath misting in the cold air, wondering if he'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe Grace had been mocking him. Maybe. A flashlight beam swept across the courtyard. Mr. Patel, the night security guard, appeared from around the corner. Master Cole, his weathered face showed surprise. What are you doing out here? Matt scrambled for an excuse. I forgot something. Inside. Mr. Patel studied him for a long moment, then glanced at the notebook in Matt's hand. Something shifted in his expression. Understanding, maybe, or approval. Come on, then. He pulled out his keys. Can't have you catching cold. He unlocked the door and held it open. As Matt passed, Mr. Patel said quietly, Mrs. Johnson uses the East Library, 3rd floor. No cameras up there. Their eyes met. The old security guard nodded once, then disappeared back into the darkness. Matt climbed the stairs in silence, his heart hammering. The East Library was smaller than the main one, a forgotten space filled with older books the family never read. Tall windows faced east, still dark but promising sunrise. Grace sat at a wooden table near the stacks, 2 steaming cups beside her. Tea, she said without preamble. You'll need it. We're starting with Hemingway. Matt slid into the chair across from her. I thought you taught Gatsby. I teach what you need to learn. Today, you need simplicity. She pushed a worn paperback across the table. The Old Man and the Sea. Page 1. Read it aloud. Aloud? Your brain learns differently when you hear your own voice. Read. Matt opened the book, cleared his throat awkwardly, and began. He was an old man who fished alone in a skiff in the Gulf Stream. His voice sounded strange in the empty library, too loud, self-conscious. But Grace closed her eyes and listened like he was performing Shakespeare. After 2 pages, she held up her hand. Stop. Now tell me, what does it feel like? Feel like? Not what it means, what it feels like. That old man, alone, 84 days without a fish. She leaned forward. What does that loneliness taste like? Matt blinked. No teacher had ever asked him that before. They wanted themes, symbols, citations, not feelings. I don't know. Desperate? Dig deeper. He thought about it, really thought. Like being invisible. Like everyone's moved on and you're still stuck in the same place, failing at the one thing you're supposed to be good at. Grace's eyes opened. She smiled. There. That's where reading begins. With recognition. They met every morning that week, always at 5:30, always in the East Library. Grace never lectured. She asked questions that made Matt's brain hurt. Why does the author use short sentences here? What's the character really saying beneath the words? When was the last time you felt what this person feels? At first, Matt fumbled. His answers were surface level, defensive. But Grace never criticized. She just asked another question, then another, until he started seeing patterns he'd never noticed. On Thursday, she handed him his notebook. Write me something, 1 page. Call it The Courage to Be Wrong. About what? About whatever that title means to you. She gathered her things. Not what you think I want. What's true. That afternoon in Mr. Carter's class, they peer-reviewed essays on Gatsby. Matt had written his the night before, actually written it, not copied from Spark Notes, or asked someone else to do it. When his partner, Olivia Perez, read his paragraph about how Gatsby's parties were desperate attempts to fill an internal void with external noise, she looked up, surprised. Did you actually write this? Yeah, why? Because it doesn't suck. She circled a phrase. This part about performing wealth instead of living it, that's actually smart. Matt felt something unfamiliar. Not pride exactly, something quieter. Relief maybe? Or validation? After class, Mr. Carter stopped him at the door. Matthew, your essay on Hemingway. He held up the paper, a solid B-. This is the first coherent paragraph you've written all year. What changed? Matt shrugged. I actually read the book this time. Read it differently, you mean? Mr. Carter's expression was thoughtful. Keep doing whatever you're doing. It's working. But success draws attention. Principal Grant reviewed grade reports that Friday afternoon. His eyes stopped on Matthew Cole's name. English, F, F, D, F, F. Then suddenly a B-. He called Mr. Carter to his office. This improvement seems sudden, dramatic even. Students improve when they start trying, Principal Grant. Or when they get help they shouldn't be getting. Grant tapped his pen against the report. I want to monitor this. If there's tutoring happening off the books, we need documentation. Insurance purposes. Of course. Mr. Carter kept his voice neutral, but worry flickered across his face. Saturday morning, Grace read Matt's essay on courage. Her eyes moved slowly across the page where he'd written, being wrong used to feel like dying, like admitting I was wrong meant admitting I was worthless. But maybe courage isn't about being right. Maybe it's about being wrong out loud, where people can see you fail and choosing to try anyway. She set it down carefully. Matthew, do you know why pride is so dangerous? Because it makes you an asshole? She smiled. Because pride studies to impress. Humility studies to understand. Pride needs witnesses. Humility just needs truth. She tapped his essay. This is humility. You're learning to see yourself clearly. That's harder than any test. It doesn't feel like learning. It feels like, he struggled for the word, like waking up. That's exactly what it is. They sat in comfortable silence as dawn light filled the library. For the first time in his life, Matt felt respected, not for his last name or his father's money, but for his own thoughts, his own words. It was terrifying. It was addictive. That evening at dinner, Richard Cole set down his fork with deliberate precision. I hear you've been spending time with the MAID. Matt froze. Grace, we just talk sometimes. About what? Books, school, nothing important. The help is paid to clean, Matthew, not to educate, not to fill your head with, Richard searched for the word, nonsense. It's not nonsense. She used to be a teacher. Used to be. Richard's voice was steel. There's a reason she's not anymore. People who can't maintain professional positions don't get to advise people who can. He returned to his meal. Find appropriate mentors. This association ends now. Matt's jaw tightened. She's helping me. My grades are improving. Your grades are your responsibility, not hers. I won't discuss this further. But as Matt left the dining room, his father's words echoing behind him, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He'd be in the East Library at 5:30 tomorrow morning. Some lessons were worth the risk. Principal Grant called a faculty meeting on Monday morning. Matthew Cole's English grade has jumped from an F average to a B- in 3 weeks. He stood at the head of the conference table, arms crossed. That kind of improvement doesn't happen organically. Someone's coaching him. Mr. Carter shifted uncomfortably. Students improve when they apply themselves, or when they have unauthorized help. Grant's eyes swept the room. If there's tutoring happening off the books, I need to know. Insurance liability, academic integrity. We can't afford another scandal, especially not with the Cole family. The message was clear. Find out who's helping Matt, or Grant would. By Tuesday, the whispers had reached the students. Matt was at his locker between classes when Derek Chen and two others from the lacrosse team cornered him. So, Cole, who's writing your essays now? Derek leaned against the adjacent locker, smirking. Daddy hire you a private tutor? Or are you just cheating like a normal person? I'm not cheating. Right, because you suddenly got smart overnight. Derek laughed. Cheating rich boy. That's what everyone's calling you. At least own it. Something hot and violent surged through Matt's chest. His fist clenched. One swing. That's all it would take to wipe that smirk off Derek's face. But then he heard Grace's voice in his head. Pride needs witnesses. Humility just needs truth. Matt unclenched his fist slowly. Believe what you want, Derek. I know what I did. He walked away, heart pounding, hands shaking, but he walked away. Derek shouted something crude after him, but Matt didn't turn around. Later, alone in the bathroom, he stared at his reflection and barely recognized himself. The old Matt would have swung, would have made it a spectacle, would have proven his power through violence. Who was he becoming? Wednesday morning, Grace was late. Matt waited in the East Library, checking his watch every 30 seconds. At 5:47, she finally appeared. Eyes red, movement slower than usual. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Lost track of time. Are you okay? Just an old memory that needed attention. She set down her bag, but didn't reach for the books. Instead, she looked at him directly. Matthew, you need to understand something. What we're doing here, it has risks. For both of us. I know. My father already. Not just your father. She sat down heavily. People are asking questions. Principal Grant, the staff, your classmates. When someone like you improves, people want explanations. And when they find out a maid has been teaching you, she trailed off. Then let them find out. You're helping me. That's not wrong. In their eyes it is. I'm overstepping, getting above my station. Her smile was bitter. I've been here before, Matthew. Watched careers end because I couldn't stay quiet. What do you mean? Grace was silent for a long moment. Then, I taught at Riverside Academy. 15 years. I loved it. The students, the books, watching minds open. Then I caught 3 seniors plagiarizing their college essays. Not just copying, buying them from a service. What happened? I reported it, did what I was supposed to do, but 2 of those students had parents on the board, important donors. She looked away. The administration buried my report, told me to pass them and forget it. When I refused, she spread her hands. Academic misconduct. They called it insubordination. I was dismissed with cause. No references, no severance. Blacklisted. Matt felt something cold in his stomach. They fired you for telling the truth? Truth is expensive, Matthew, especially when it threatens powerful people. Her voice cracked slightly. My husband, David, he was a teacher too. The stress of it all, watching me destroyed for doing the right thing. He had a heart attack 6 months later. Died in the hospital holding my hand. Grace, I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry, learn. She met his eyes. Truth cost me my career, my husband, everything I'd built. But it didn't cost me my soul. I still know how to teach, still know what matters. That's why I'm here with you, even though I know how this might end. Matt's throat tightened. This woman had lost everything for principles most people wouldn't risk a parking ticket for. And she was risking it again. For him. I won't let them hurt you, he said. You can't control what they do, Matthew. You can only control who you become. Thursday dawn, Olivia Perez arrived at school early to use the computer lab. Her scholarship didn't include a laptop, so she relied on the school's equipment for college applications. She took the back stairs to avoid the cleaning crew and heard voices from the 3rd floor, the East Library where nobody went. Curious, she peered through the door's window. Matt Cole sat at a table, bending over a book, writing intensely. Across from him, Mrs. Johnson, the maid Olivia sometimes chatted with during lunch prep, asked questions, listened, nodded. It wasn't tutoring exactly. It looked more like a conversation, like two people exploring ideas together. Olivia watched for another minute, then quietly descended the stairs. She'd judged Matt as just another rich kid coasting on privilege. Maybe she'd been wrong, or maybe people were more complicated than she'd thought. That afternoon, Principal Grant drafted a letter on official letterhead. Dear Mrs. Johnson, it has come to our attention that you may be providing unauthorized academic assistance to a student. This falls outside your contracted duties and creates liability concerns. Please cease all non-custodial interactions with students immediately, or we will be forced to terminate your employment. He didn't send it yet. First, he needed confirmation. At the Cole mansion, Richard summoned Thomas, the head butler. The maid, Grace Johnson, she's been spending inappropriate amounts of time with my son. I've heard whispers, sir. Make sure she understands boundaries. Politely but firmly, her job is to clean, nothing more. Of course, sir. Friday morning, Grace appeared with a thin, worn book, dark cover, gold lettering. We've been reading about individual struggles, she said. Now it's time to see the larger picture. She placed The Souls of Black Folk in front of Matt. W.E.B. Du Bois, written in 1903. Still true today. Matt picked it up carefully. What's it about? About seeing, really seeing, not just reading words, but understanding what it means to live in a world that treats people as invisible. She stood to leave, then paused. Matthew, this book will challenge you, make you uncomfortable, show you realities you've been protected from. When you're ready to see them, really see, this will show you. She left him alone with the book and a question he couldn't escape. How much had he been blind to his entire life? Matt didn't sleep Friday night. He sat at his desk, The Souls of Black Folk open under his reading lamp, post-it notes marking pages that hit him like physical blows. Du Bois wrote about the veil, the invisible barrier between Black Americans and the rest of the world, about double consciousness, about being forced to see yourself through the contemptuous eyes of others. Matt thought about Grace, how she moved through the mansion like a ghost, how people looked through her, not at her, how his father called her the help without ever using her name, how Matt himself had done the same for 17 years. At 3 a.m., he opened his notebook and started writing. Not an essay, a confession. I've spent my whole life being seen. My name opens doors. My money buys attention. People notice me everywhere I go. But Grace, she's invisible. Not because she wants to be, because we've decided she should be. We've agreed collectively that people who clean our floors don't deserve to be fully human in our eyes. I never questioned it. Why would I? Invisibility was convenient. It meant I never had to think about who scrubbed my toilet or made my bed. Never had to consider that they had dreams, stories, pain. Grace taught me to read. But more than that, she taught me to see. And now I can't unsee. Can't go back to the comfortable blindness of privilege. Du Bois called it the veil. I call it shame. He wrote for 2 hours, hands cramping, eyes burning. When he finally stopped, dawn was breaking through his window. Grace read his pages in the East Library that morning, her hands trembling slightly. When she reached the end, she set the notebook down and pressed her fingers to her eyes. Grace, did I say something wrong? She shook her head, unable to speak for a moment. When she looked up, tears tracked down her cheeks. Matthew, do you understand what you've done here? Written a messy confession? You've seen. Her voice was thick. Really seen. Not just read about injustice, felt it, recognized your place in it. She touched his words gently. This is what education is supposed to do. Transform, not just inform. Matt felt something crack open in his chest. I want to help other students, the ones who are struggling like I was. Could we make this bigger? Grace smiled through her tears. I was hoping you'd ask. Monday morning, Matt found Olivia Perez in the computer lab. I know what you saw, he said without preamble. Thursday morning, the library. Olivia tensed but met his eyes. So? So I wanted to ask if you'd join us. It's not tutoring, it's more like A conversation about books, about ideas, no grades, no judgment, just thinking together. Why would I want your help? It's not my help, it's Grace's, Mrs. Johnson. She used to teach. Matt paused. And honestly, I think you'd make us better. You actually care about learning, not just passing. Olivia studied him for a long moment. Who else? Marcus Webb from AP History. He's smart, but panics on tests. And Jenny Kim, she just transferred in, doesn't know anyone. The scholarship kids and the transfer student. Olivia's expression was unreadable. Interesting group. The kids who actually need to learn to survive. Yeah. Matt met her eyes. So will you come? Tomorrow, 5:30. East Library, 3rd floor. Why so early? Because no one else is awake, and because he struggled for the words. Because what we're doing matters, and things that matter don't wait for convenient times. Olivia's skepticism cracked slightly. Fine, one session, but if this is some rich kid ego project, I'm out. Fair enough. Tuesday morning, 4 students sat in mismatched chairs Grace had quietly borrowed from storage. The abandoned reading room felt less like a library and more like a sanctuary. Soft morning light, the smell of old books, a thermos of tea Grace had brought in her bag. No grades here, Grace said simply. No wrong answers, just honest thinking. She wrote 3 words on the dusty whiteboard. Read, reflect, rewrite. That's the method. Read something that matters. Reflect on what it means to you, not what you think it should mean. Rewrite your understanding until it's true. Marcus raised his hand tentatively. But how do we know if we're right? You won't, not at first, maybe not ever completely. Grace smiled. But that's the point. Real learning is comfortable with uncertainty. It's grades that demand false confidence. Over the next 2 weeks, something remarkable happened. The circle grew. Not in numbers, Grace kept it to 6 students maximum, but in depth. Jenny Kim, who'd barely spoken in regular classes, read a passage from Their Eyes Were Watching God and cried while explaining how it reminded her of her grandmother's immigration story. Marcus Webb stopped apologizing for his thoughts and started building on others' ideas. Olivia challenged Matt's interpretation of a James Baldwin essay, and instead of getting defensive, he listened and revised his understanding. And Matt learned to shut up and serve, to ask questions instead of showing off, to make space for others' voices. Grace wrote quotes on the board each morning. Learning is transformation, not transaction. Real success is who you become when no one is grading. The goal isn't to be right, it's to be honest. The students started arriving earlier, staying later. They brought their own books to share, drew connections between texts and their lives, laughed, argued respectfully, grew. One morning, as Matt watched Jenny explain a concept to Marcus, both of them leaning over a shared notebook, he felt something shift fundamentally inside him. He wasn't the golden boy anymore, wasn't the center of attention or the most important person in the room. He was just another student, another searcher, and it felt better than any spotlight ever had. Principal Grant noticed the East Library lights at 5:43 a.m. on a Wednesday. He made a note. Thursday, same thing. Friday, Monday. He pulled security logs. 6 students entering through the side entrance between 5:20 and 5:35 a.m. Matthew Cole, Olivia Perez, Marcus Webb, Jenny Kim, 2 others, and every morning, just before them, Grace Johnson. Grant opened a file on his computer. Unauthorized instruction, evidence. He began typing methodically. Times, dates, student names. A pattern of behavior that violated school policy and her employment contract. By Friday, he had 12 pages. The memo arrived on Richard Cole's desk via internal courier. Plain manila envelope. His assistant had flagged it. Urgent. Re your son. Richard opened it during his afternoon conference call, half listening to quarterly projections while scanning the page. Mr. Cole, we've discovered that a member of your household staff, Grace Johnson, has been conducting unauthorized educational sessions with your son and other students on school property. This constitutes a breach of protocol, potential liability, and raises questions about appropriate boundaries. We thought you should be aware before we take formal action. Respectfully, Principal Harrison Grant. Richard's jaw tightened. He muted his microphone. Cancel my 4 o'clock, he told his assistant. I'm going home early. He folded the memo carefully and slipped it into his briefcase. It was time to end this nonsense. Richard Cole arrived home at 3:47 p.m., bypassing his usual study and heading straight to the service wing. Grace was folding linens in the small staff room, humming quietly. She looked up when his shadow filled the doorway, and something in her expression suggested she'd been expecting this. Mr. Cole. Mrs. Johnson. He stepped inside, closing the door. The memo sat folded in his jacket pocket, but he didn't need to reference it. I've received a concerning report from Westbridge Academy about the morning sessions. So you don't deny it. Why would I? Grace set down the sheet she'd been folding, meeting his eyes without flinching. Your son asked for help. I provided it. You were hired to clean, not to educate, not to insert yourself into my son's academic life. I was hired to maintain your home, yes, but when a drowning person asks for help, I don't check my job description first. Richard's jaw tightened. That's not your decision to make. Matthew has teachers, tutors available if needed, professional educators with credentials and liability insurance. Professional educators who passed him for years without teaching him anything. Grace's voice remained calm, but steel ran beneath it. With respect, Mr. Cole, your son was failing because no one actually cared if he learned. They cared about keeping your donations. I cared about his mind. Your caring is inappropriate. It crosses boundaries. Boundaries, Grace smiled sadly. Interesting word. I've cleaned your toilets, washed your undergarments, scrubbed floors you've walked across without seeing me. Those boundaries seem fine, but the moment I help your son think critically, suddenly I've overstepped. That's different. Is it, or is it just that you're comfortable with me being invisible? She held his gaze. Matthew is learning, Mr. Cole, really learning, not memorizing for grades, not performing for approval, understanding, growing, becoming someone with substance beyond his last name. And in the process, you've violated school policy, created liability issues, and undermined proper educational channels. Richard pulled out the memo. Principal Grant has documented 12 instances of unauthorized instruction. He's prepared to take formal action. Against a MAID teaching students to read thoughtfully, that's what they're calling misconduct now. Against someone operating outside their authority and expertise. Grace was quiet for a moment. Then, I taught English for 15 years at Riverside Academy. I have a master's degree in literature. I lost my position for refusing to overlook plagiarism by wealthy students. Her voice didn't waver. So when you question my expertise, Mr. Cole, understand that I know exactly what I'm doing. And I know exactly why people like you want me to stop. Richard's expression hardened. You're terminated. Effective immediately. Thomas will arrange your final payment. I want you off the property by evening. Of course. Grace nodded slowly. After all, your floors are spotless now. Your values, less so, but at least your priorities are clear. She walked past him with quiet dignity, leaving Richard standing alone in the staff room, the memo trembling slightly in his hand. Matt found out at dinner. Grace Johnson is no longer employed here, Richard announced, cutting his steak with surgical precision. Her services have been terminated. The fork slipped from Matt's hand, clattering against his plate. What? She overstepped her role. The matter is closed. She was helping me. She was violating policy, mine and the school's. I asked her to help. She was the only person who what? Filled your head with ideas above her station? Made you think a maid's wisdom matters more than proper education? Matt stood abruptly, chair scraping back. Her station? She has a master's degree. She taught for 15 years and lost that position for insubordination, which should tell you everything you need to know. Richard didn't look up from his meal. People who can't maintain professional standards don't get to advise those who can. You'll find appropriate tutors. This discussion is over. Matt left without being dismissed, something he'd never done before. He ran to the third floor, to Grace's small room at the end of the staff corridor. The door was open. The room was empty. No books on the shelf, no photos on the nightstand, no worn cardigan hanging on the back of the chair. Just clean, impersonal space, like she'd never existed. On the stripped mattress sat his notebook, and beneath it, a folded piece of paper. Matt's hand shook as he opened it. "Matthew, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Don't waste energy being angry, channel it into purpose. You've learned the most important lesson. Stop impressing. Start understanding. Everything else flows from that. The circle you've built doesn't need me. It needs you to lead with the humility you've learned. Keep reading, keep questioning, keep making space for others to grow. And remember, real education happens in the margins, the early mornings, the moments when no one's watching or grading. That's where transformation lives. You're ready, even if you don't believe it yet." With deep respect and hope, Matt sank to the floor, the note pressed against his chest, and for the first time since childhood, he wept. The next morning, the East Library felt cavernous and wrong. Olivia arrived first, saw Matt's red eyes, and said nothing. Just sat down, then Marcus, then Jenny. "She's gone," Matt said finally. "My father fired her." Silence. "So what do we do now?" Jenny's voice was small. "I don't know." Matt looked at the empty chair where Grace always sat. "I don't know how to do this without her." "Maybe that's the point," Olivia said quietly. "Maybe we're supposed to figure it out ourselves now." They tried, read a chapter of Baldwin, discussed haltingly, but without Grace's questions guiding them, without her wisdom connecting ideas, the conversation felt hollow, performative. After 20 minutes, they gave up. Over the next week, Matt's grades began to slip. Not catastrophically, but noticeably. The B- became a C+. The coherent paragraphs grew muddled, and Principal Grant noticed. He called Matt to his office Friday afternoon. "Mr. Cole, your improvement has plateaued, and I've received reports that you and several other students have been meeting without supervision." Grant folded his hands. "Unauthorized study groups raise concerns about academic integrity. If this continues, I'll have no choice but to pursue disciplinary action, possibly expulsion. We were just reading together. Without a credentialed supervisor, it's considered an illicit tutoring ring. Do you understand the liability? The potential for cheating?" Matt understood perfectly. They'd been caught learning, and that was somehow worse than never trying at all. Monday morning, Matt walked through Westbridge's halls in a fog of anger and grief. Then he saw it. A poster on the bulletin board, bright blue with bold letters, "Annual Speech Contest. What it means to succeed, open to all students, winner speaks at graduation." Matt stopped, stared. Grace's voice echoed in his memory. "Real success is who you become when no one is grading." He pulled the notice off the board, gripping it so hard the paper crumpled at the edges. This was it, his chance to speak. You're really doing this?" Olivia found Matt in the East Library 3 days before the contest, surrounded by crumpled paper. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair uncombed. "Trying to?" He gestured at the mess. "But everything I write sounds fake, performative, like I'm trying to impress judges instead of tell the truth." Olivia sat down across from him. "Then stop writing for judges. Write for her." "Grace? She taught you to stop impressing and start understanding, right?" Olivia picked up one of his drafts, scanned it. "This sounds like the old you, the one who talked at people instead of to them." "Grace wouldn't want that." Matt dropped his head into his hands. "I don't know if I can do this without her." "You're not without her. You have everything she gave you." Olivia tapped the battered notebook. Her words, her questions, her method. Use them. That afternoon, Mr. Carter stopped Matt after class. "I heard you entered the speech contest." "Yeah, probably a mistake." "Or the bravest thing you've done." Mr. Carter adjusted his glasses. "Matthew, I don't know all the details of what happened with Mrs. Johnson, but I know you've changed, really changed. And that deserves to be heard. Principal Grant's going to hate it." "Probably." Mr. Carter smiled slightly. But the doors open at 6 a.m. like always, if you need a quiet place to practice. Their eyes met. Understanding passed between them. Thank you, Mr. Carter. Thank Grace, I'm just keeping the lights on. The night before the contest, Matt sat at his desk with Grace's notebook open. Not to the blank pages, to the margins where she'd written her questions, her wisdom, her gentle challenges. What does this feel like? Dig deeper. Pride studies to impress, humility studies to understand. Stop impressing, start understanding. He started writing, not an essay, a conversation, imagining Grace across from him, asking questions, pushing him toward truth. By 4 a.m., he had it. The auditorium was packed. Students filled the front rows, parents and faculty behind them. Principal Grant sat in the second row with the school board. In the back, reporters from the local education beat took notes. Matt stood backstage, gripping his notebook so hard his knuckles went white. 5 other contestants had already spoken. Polished speeches about entrepreneurship, innovation, leadership through adversity. They were good, impressive, everything Grace had taught him not to be. Matthew Cole, the moderator announced, speaking on what it means to succeed. Matt walked into the spotlight. The audience blurred. His prepared opening line evaporated from his mind. For 3 terrible seconds, he stood frozen. Then he looked down at the notebook in his hands, saw Grace's handwriting in the margins. Tell the truth. That's all. He took a breath. People think success is about winning, he began, voice shaking slightly. Getting the grades, the scholarships, the acceptance letters, the corner office. But what if we've been measuring the wrong thing? He looked up, found Olivia in the third row. She nodded. 5 months ago, I was failing everything. Not because I was stupid, though I convinced myself I was, but because I'd never learned to actually learn. I'd been passed along, grade after grade, because my last name was worth more than my comprehension. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Principal Grant shifted uncomfortably. Then someone taught me what real education looks like. She wasn't paid to teach me, wasn't even supposed to talk to me beyond basic pleasantries. But she saw something in me I couldn't see in myself, potential buried under arrogance and fear. Matt's voice grew stronger. Her name is Grace Johnson, and until 3 weeks ago, she cleaned my family's floors. Most people never looked at her, never learned her name, never wondered what she might have to offer beyond cleaning supplies and polite silence. He held up the notebook. She gave me this, told me to write what I didn't know. Sounds simple, right? But it shattered everything I thought about myself, because I didn't know anything. Not really. I knew how to perform, how to coast, how to hide behind privilege, but I didn't know how to think, how to question, how to see. The auditorium had gone completely silent. Grace taught me that learning isn't about memorizing facts for tests. It's about transformation. Becoming someone different than who you were yesterday. And she taught me that real success isn't about what you achieve. It's about who you notice, who you see, who you make space for. His voice cracked slightly. She lost her teaching career for telling the truth about plagiarism by wealthy students. She lost her husband to the stress of that fight. She lost everything except her integrity. And then she used that integrity to teach a spoiled kid like me how to actually read, how to actually think, how to actually care about something beyond myself. Matt looked directly at Principal Grant. 3 weeks ago, she was fired for helping me, for overstepping her station, for daring to educate when she was hired to clean. He paused. But here's what they didn't understand. Grace Johnson never stopped being a teacher. She just stopped getting paid for it. Because real teachers teach regardless of their job title. They teach because people need to learn, because truth matters more than policy. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage. So when you ask me what it means to succeed, I'll tell you. Success is seeing the people everyone else ignores. It's learning from wisdom wherever you find it, even if it comes from someone society has deemed invisible. It's having the courage to admit you don't know, to be transformed by truth, and to honor the teachers who saved you, even when the system punishes them for it. Matt's voice dropped to something quieter. more intimate. Grace Johnson cleared the fog in my head. She taught me to stop impressing and start understanding. She gave me a future I didn't earn, but might now deserve. He held up the notebook one final time. This is success, not winning, becoming, not performing, seeing, not impressing, understanding. Thank you, Grace, wherever you are. He walked off stage to absolute silence. Then someone stood. Olivia, then Marcus, Jenny, Mr. Carter. One by one, the auditorium rose. The applause started slowly, then built like thunder. In the very back, in the shadows near the exit, an older black woman in a simple coat pressed her hand to her heart. Tears streamed down her face. Grace Johnson watched the boy she'd taught finally find his voice. Then quietly, she slipped out the door before anyone could see her. Principal Grant sat frozen, face pale. The school board members exchanged glances. The reporters typed frantically. Emily Ross, education correspondent for the New York Observer, pulled out her phone and tweeted, "Westbridge student Matthew Cole just delivered the most powerful speech on education I've heard in 20 years. Kid honored his fired maid turned teacher. Standing ovation. Story coming." Within an hour, the clip was online. By midnight, it had 500,000 views. By morning, Grace Johnson's name was trending nationwide, and everything was about to change. Grace's story, to make her sacrifice mean something. He might not have her guidance anymore, but he had her lessons, and that would have to be enough. The headline hit the New York Observer's website at 6:47 a.m. Billionaire's son credits fired black maid for saving his education. By 9 a.m., and it was everywhere. Bloomberg, Forbes, the video had been shared 2.3 million times. Richard Cole's phone wouldn't stop ringing. "Richard, it's David Chen from the board. We need to discuss this PR situation with your son." "Mr. Cole, this is Amanda from Communications. We're getting interview requests. How should we respond to questions about the household staff?" "Richard, Martin here. Saw the speech. Investors are asking questions. Is this going to affect the quarterly?" He silenced his phone and stood at his office window, 53 floors above Manhattan, watching the city move without him. His assistant knocked tentatively. "Mr. Cole, the Wall Street Journal wants a statement about Mrs. Johnson's termination. And there's a situation developing on social media." "What situation?" "People are calling for her reinstatement. There's a petition, 40,000 signatures in 3 hours. Richard closed his eyes. "Leave me." "Sir, I said leave me." Alone, Richard pulled up the video on his computer. His son stood on that stage holding a battered notebook, speaking with a conviction Richard had never heard from him before. Not performing, not posturing, just honest. Grace Johnson cleared the fog in my head. She taught me to stop impressing and start understanding. Richard watched it through once, then again. On the second viewing, when Matt's voice cracked talking about Grace losing everything, Richard felt something he hadn't felt in years. Shame. He'd built an empire through precision and control, through measuring everything, trusting nothing but numbers and contracts. He'd taught his son that success was quantifiable, that weakness was failure, that emotion was inefficiency, and in doing so, he'd almost destroyed the only thing that actually mattered, his son's humanity. Richard sat in his leather chair, surrounded by awards and accolades, and realized he'd spent 20 years building machines when he should have been building a man. Grace Johnson had done in 5 months what he'd failed to do in 17 years. She'd taught Matt to think. Grace's apartment was in a modest building in Queens, 4th floor walk-up, the kind of place Richard had never had reason to visit. He knocked at 7 p.m., still in his suit, looking profoundly out of place in the narrow hallway. Grace opened the door, unsurprised. "Mr. Cole, Mrs. Johnson, may I come in?" She stepped aside wordlessly. The apartment was small but immaculate. Books lined makeshift shelves. A single photograph on the side table showed a man in academic regalia. Smiling broadly, her late husband, Richard assumed. "I saw the speech," Richard said. "I imagine many people did. My son spoke very highly of you. Your son learned to speak truthfully. That's not the same as speaking highly. Grace gestured to a worn armchair. Please sit. Richard sat, feeling more uncomfortable than he had in any boardroom negotiation. I came to apologize, he said finally, and to make amends. I can reinstate your position, double your salary, provide benefits. No, the word was gentle but absolute. Mrs. Johnson, please understand. I understand perfectly, Mr. Cole. You're embarrassed. Your son's viral speech has made you look like the villain in a story about education and dignity. You want to fix it with money. She smiled sadly. But some things can't be purchased back. Then what do you want? I want you to understand what you did. Not to me, I'll be fine. But to Matthew, you saw him struggling, and instead of helping, you cut him off. You saw him finally learning, and instead of celebrating, you punished the teacher. Because learning came from the wrong source, from someone beneath your station. Richard's jaw tightened. I was protecting him. From what? Growth? Humility? The understanding that wisdom doesn't arrive in expensive packages? Grace leaned forward. Mr. Cole, your son was drowning in privilege. I threw him the rope. You tried to cut it because you didn't like the rope's appearance. The words landed like physical blows. I built everything I have from nothing, Richard said quietly. I know what it takes to succeed. You built machines, Mr. Cole. Impressive machines, a billion-dollar empire. Grace's eyes held his. But your son isn't a machine. He's a mind, a soul, and those require different architecture. The silence stretched between them. What should I have done? Richard's voice was barely audible. Trusted him, trusted me, trusted that real education happens in unexpected places. She stood, signaling the conversation's end. But it's not too late. Not for him, maybe not even for you. Matt was in his room when his father knocked. Come in. Richard entered slowly, like he was approaching foreign territory. In a way, he hadn't sat in Matt's room for a real conversation in years. I watched your speech, Richard said. I know. Everyone has. No, I mean, I really watched it. Listened. Richard sat on the edge of Matt's desk. You were right. About all of it. Matt looked up, startled. His father never admitted being wrong. Grace Johnson taught you what I failed to teach you, Richard continued, voice rough. How to think, how to question, how to see beyond surfaces. He paused. I built machines, Matthew. Your entire life, I built machines, companies, systems, processes. I treated you like another project to optimize. But you're not a machine. No, I'm not. She built minds. That's what you said in the speech. And you were right. She built yours while I was too proud to notice. Richard's hands clenched. I fired her because how she made me see my own failure as a father, because she succeeded where I didn't. And instead of thanking her, I eliminated the evidence. Matt's throat tightened. Dad, I'm sorry. The words seemed to cost Richard everything. I'm sorry for cutting you off, for dismissing Grace, for teaching you that worth comes from net worth. I was wrong. They sat in silence, years of distance compressing into this one moment. Then Matt stood and crossed to where his father sat. I forgive you, he said quietly, but I need you to understand. I'm not going back to who I was. Grace changed me. I can't unsee what she showed me. I don't want you to go back. Richard's voice broke slightly. I want you to keep going forward, and I want to learn how. The embrace was awkward, painful, overdue. Not victory, just the beginning of repair. The next morning, a press conference. Reporters packed the room. Matt stood at the podium, Richard behind him, a silent show of support. What happens now, Matthew? Emily Ross called out. Will Mrs. Johnson return to your family's employment? No, Matt said clearly, because Grace Johnson deserves more than returning to a place that undervalued her. She deserves a platform, resources, the ability to teach the way she knows how. So what's next? Matt glanced back at his father, who nodded. We're starting a foundation, the Grace Institute, free tutoring and mentorship for students who've been failed by traditional systems. No grades, no fees, no barriers based on who your parents are or what your bank account looks like. He looked directly into the cameras. We're building places where kids don't have to beg to be seen, where learning matters more than performing, where teachers like Grace can teach without fear of being punished for actually caring. And your father supports this? Richard stepped forward. Completely. I'm funding it personally, and I'm also establishing an endowment at Riverside Academy, the school that terminated Mrs. Johnson, for teachers who prioritize integrity over convenience. The reporters erupted with questions, but Matt just smiled. Somewhere in Queens, Grace Johnson watched the press conference on her laptop and allowed herself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, the seed she'd planted would grow into a forest. 1 year later, the community center on 142nd Street had been abandoned for 3 years. Windows boarded, walls tagged with graffiti, a monument to municipal neglect. Now, on a crisp October morning, it stood transformed. Fresh paint, new windows, a hand-painted mural covering the entire front wall, showing an open book with roots growing down and branches reaching up. At the center, in elegant script, learning is transformation, not transaction. Grace Johnson, a crowd gathered on the sidewalk. Parents with children, students in Westbridge uniforms, local residents curious about the ribbon stretched across the front doors, news vans with satellite dishes. And at the center of it all, holding oversized scissors, Grace Johnson. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back, eyes bright with something that looked like disbelief mixed with joy. I still can't believe this is real, she whispered to Matt, who stood beside her. Believe it. He gestured at the building. You built this. We just provided the funding. We built it together. Grace looked at the crowd. All of us. Emily Ross, now a senior correspondent for the Times, stood nearby with her camera crew. Mrs. Johnson, can you tell us what the Grace Institute means to you? Grace paused, choosing her words carefully. It means that what happened to me, being punished for teaching, for caring, doesn't have to happen to others. It means students who've been ignored or underestimated or pushed through systems that don't see them. They have a place now, not for grades, for growth. And what makes this different from traditional tutoring? We don't teach to tests. We teach to transform. Grace smiled. Students come here to discover what they don't know and learn without shame. We read together, question together, grow together. No fees, no judgments, no barriers. She cut the ribbon and the crowd erupted in applause. Inside, the transformation was even more striking. What had been a gutted shell was now a warm learning space. The main hall held mismatched comfortable chairs arranged in circles. No rows, no desks, just conversation spaces. Bookshelves lined every wall, filled with donated volumes. Soft lighting, plants in the corners. Chalkboards covered with quotes. Pride studies to impress, humility studies to understand. You don't measure depth with a shallow ruler. Real success is who you become when no one is grading. In the first classroom, Grace stood at a blackboard, chalk dust already on her fingertips, 12 students sitting in a circle around her. Teenagers who'd been labeled at risk or low performing or simply invisible. Today, Grace said, we're reading Langston Hughes, A Dream Deferred. But before we look at the words, I want you to tell me, what's a dream you've had to postpone? Not abandon, just put on hold. Silence at first. Then a girl in the back raised her hand tentatively. I wanted to go to art school, but my family needs me to work. Thank you for that honesty. Grace wrote it on the board. Dreams deferred, not dead, just waiting. Now let's see what Hughes says about waiting. Through the doorway, Matt watched his former teacher do what she was born to do. He'd seen her clean floors with the same dignity she now used to open minds. But this, seeing her in her element, surrounded by students who actually wanted to learn, this felt right in a way nothing else had. She's remarkable. Matt turned. Mr. Patel stood beside him in civilian clothes, his security uniform replaced by a volunteer badge. You're here? Matt asked. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, I help with the literacy program. The old guard smiled. Turns out I like teaching almost as much as I liked opening doors for students who needed them opened. Down the hall, Mr. Carter emerged from another classroom carrying a stack of books. He'd left Westbridge 3 months ago to become the Grace Institute's curriculum director. Matthew, good to see you. They shook hands. Your father's donation bought us another 100 books. Tell him, thank you. Tell him yourself, he's here somewhere. And he was. Richard Cole stood in the back of the parent resource room, listening to a financial literacy workshop he'd quietly funded. No press, no fanfare. Just a billionaire learning how to help without overwhelming. Olivia Perez, now a freshman at Columbia on a full scholarship, ran the peer mentoring program 3 afternoons a week. She'd recruited Marcus and Jenny, and together they guided younger students through the same journey Grace had guided them through. The circle expanding, the transformation spreading. That evening, after the crowds left and the building grew quiet, Matt found Grace in her office, a small room with a desk, 2 chairs, and windows facing the mural. Exhausted, he asked. Exhilarated. She leaned back, smiling. Do you know what it feels like to teach without fear? Without worrying that caring too much will cost you your job? I'm starting to understand. Matt had deferred college to help run the institute, much to his father's initial dismay and eventual acceptance. Grace, I wanted to give you something. He pulled out the battered notebook, the one she'd given him that first morning, the one that had saved his life. I think this belongs back with you. Grace looked at it for a long moment, then shook her head gently. You don't need this anymore, Matthew. I know, but I want to keep it anyway. To remember where I began. He held it out. Take it. Write new wisdom in it. Pass it to another student who needs it like I did. Grace accepted it slowly, running her fingers over the worn leather. You've become quite the teacher yourself, you know. The way you listen to students. Make space for their voices. That's not something I taught you. Yes, it is, every moment of it. They sat in comfortable silence as sunset painted the office walls orange and gold. You know what the best part is? Grace said finally. It's not the building, not even the students, though I love them. It's knowing that learning is happening the right way. Transformation, not transaction. That's the legacy. From the hallway came the sound of laughter. Evening students arriving for the adult literacy class. Voices in Spanish, Arabic, English, mixing together in the universal language of people hungry to grow. Matt and Grace walked to the doorway together. She reached for the light switch, then paused. Thank you, Matthew, for seeing me when I was invisible, for hearing me when I was silent, for building this when I thought my teaching days were over. Thank you for not giving up on a spoiled kid who thought he knew everything. You never knew everything, Grace smiled, but you learned the most important thing, how to keep learning. She turned off the light. Together they walked down the hall, past the mural, past the classrooms filling with evening students, past the volunteers preparing lessons. The Grace Institute wasn't just a building. It was proof that wisdom could come from unexpected places, that transformation was possible, that one teacher armed with nothing but questions and compassion could change not just a student, but an entire community. Outside, Richard Cole stood by his car, waiting for his son. When Matt emerged, they didn't speak, just nodded, understanding passing between them. They were both still learning, and that, Grace had taught them, was the only real success.